Hey guys, Falafel92, and today is Music Monday, and this time we will be covering the Beatles. So let's get started. We'll be starting with the Beatles Unauthorized, which is a mix of an interview and a live concert. It was pretty interesting watching them play and then having an interview afterwards. I thought it was pretty cool. Oh yes, and also having interviews with, like, say, Phil Collins of Genesis. That was also a pretty good deal to watch too. And now we have the vinyl records, being Revolver, the White Album, and John Lennon's Imagine. Admittedly, I only heard maybe part of this album, being the title track and maybe a couple of songs on side one. I didn't listen to the full thing. It's perhaps, for me personally, I listened to Unfinished Music #1, Two Virgins. I personally did not care for that album, and that may have had an effect on Imagine. So that's just me. I mean, also, if you know that the Two Virgins, album cover, you would think that maybe Ono and Lennon were watching a bit of Monty Python when they made that, but that's just me. Now, Revolver and the White Album are pretty solid albums overall. I just, for me, I'm not really fond that they cut a couple of songs off Revolver, but, it's a case of Yellow Submarine was deemed a single at the time of release, so they removed it. I think maybe one other, I know that I'm Only Sleeping was cut off because it wasn't deemed, it was a weird song at the time, but, I know there's one other song that got cut from the album, but that's neither here nor there. The White Album, there's really no difference from the vinyl to the CD version, but, that's not really, yeah, it's just basically the same thing. It's just how they place, certain sections of the songs going from one song to the other is different, and so now we can come to the compilation albums, the Red Album, the Blue Album, and the early Beatles tapes. Much like the Beatles Unauthorized, it was pretty interesting listening to their early tapes. That's how their early concerts were, how they got good at their later concert touring from the early to mid 60s. So that's where they got so good at, touring. And so now the Blue and Red albums are pretty good albums overall. I prefer the Red album because it has a lot of their better songs. I mean, yes, they have good songs on the Blue album, but that's just me. Now, so Help is a pretty solid album overall. It's pretty fun listening to it, because especially since it's a soundtrack, much like Magical Mystery Tour, but that's just me. Revolver, the CD version is much better than the record version, but that's just me. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band is a pretty solid album as well. I mean, I like how they had gotten more experimental since Revolver. That was pretty good for me. Yeah, it was a pretty fun album overall. I mean, it kind of starts getting old by the time of, the later, like, starting with Within You, Without You, that's where the song starts getting redundant and just repetitive. And yeah, the Magical Mystery Tour, the CD version, I think is a pretty good album overall. And yeah, again, like Sgt. Pepper's, it kind of gets redundant listening to it at the end, but it's still a solid album. The White Album, I think that it should have honestly have been at least two separate albums. I have firmly stood by that. Same thing with the record version. There's a couple of songs I would have gotten taken off record 1/CD 1 and took it over to the second record /CD, but that's just me. I would have taken, like, say, Birthday, Revolution 9, and, yeah, those songs I would have gladly have taken and put them on disc 1/vinyl 1, just because for me, those are the better songs off the second side, but that's just me. And Abbey Road, that was the album I accidentally had sold a few years ago, but I bought it again because I'm like, I like this album. is a pretty solid album, but otherwise, I kind of regret getting rid of it, but that's just me. But otherwise, it was a very solid album. I think that it starts off very poorly. I think that Come Together, not that I will gladly not come together because it's not that good of a song, but that's me. Something I used to like that song, now I just think it's overplayed and it's like, yeah, it's kind of meh. Same thing with Here Comes the Sun, also an overrated song, but that's just me. So yeah, that's all of my Beatles vinyls, all the Beatles albums, and one documentary. But yeah, I really love the Beatles, and that's why I have so many of their content, and that's what got me into music. So yeah, my Music Monday with Falafel 92.